He wasn't supposed to notice the blood. The city's most ruthless mafia boss just sat at table 11. Lena thought her cheap concealer hid the bruises her husband gave her, but Adrian Castellano reads people like financial reports. He left a $200 tip on a $70 bill and gave a chilling order to his men. Get me her full name, address, everything. When a mob boss decides you're his problem, your life changes overnight.
The bathroom tiles pressed like ice against her cheek, a cold contrast to the metallic taste of copper in her mouth. Lena understood her agony. Stay and fade into nothing, or run and risk a violent end. You and I have seen this desperation before, haven't we? The heavy nights when survival feels impossible. Everything shifted when a stranger saw through her 2 years of hidden torment. He offered no soft words. This ends now, he said. What Lena could not fathom was that her rescue carried a heavy toll orchestrated by the city's most lethal shadow. Let me know where you are listening from tonight as we walk this tragic road together. The fluorescent bulb hummed, a sickening lullaby, as her trembling fingers gripped the cracked floor. The porcelain had left a brutal welt on her skin. She felt the flesh swelling, a burning heat pulsing with her heartbeat. Lena did not weep. Tears lost their purpose during the 6th month of this nightmare. Instead, she coldly catalogued her pain. The left eye would bruise, easily hidden. The split lip was a secret to swallow. Her ribs ached, but were intact. She knew the agonizing difference. Out in the hall, Eric finally stopped his restless pacing. The apartment sank into a heavy silence, broken only by the hollow laughter of a midnight television show. It felt like the room itself was mocking her misery. Gripping the sink, Lena dragged her battered frame upward, avoiding the mirror until she had no choice. The face belonged to a 26-year-old, but her hollow eyes carried the devastation of a soul that had lived 100 tragic lives. Her shift at Romano's started in 6 hours. She needed ice and sleep, though the adrenaline in her veins made rest a cruel dream. Her hands shook as she reached for the faucet. Lukewarm water washed away the blood, and Lena watched the pink drops circle the drain. She would tell the staff she fell. Again. Maria had stopped asking questions long ago, offering only a tragic, helpless stare. Truly, what could anyone do? Reaching beneath the sink, Lena grabbed her makeup bag, foundation, concealer, powder. She was an artist at painting over trauma. People watched her tutorials to enhance their beauty, but Lena wondered if anyone made guides on erasing the brutal evidence of a monster's rage. She applied the heavy foundation in desperate, methodical layers, burying her bleak reality deep beneath the flawless finish. Pat, blend, set. The bruise was darkening, creeping beneath her skin like spilled ink. She added concealer, carefully building an illusion of normalcy around the violent edges. Stepping back, she looked almost human again. The bedroom was pitch black when she emerged. Eric was a shadow in the bed, deep in slumber. Tomorrow, he would beg for forgiveness. He always did. He would pour coffee, touch her arm gently, and offer a pathetic imitation of regret. Lena would accept the hollow apology. Terrified of the day he decided she was no longer worth his twisted pity. Wrapping herself in a thin blanket, she collapsed onto the couch. Rest only visited in brutal, jagged fragments, constantly shattered by the creaking apartment walls and the deafening, anxious thud of her own racing heart. When pale dawn crept through the blinds, Lena was awake, desperate to escape. Romano's was her sanctuary. The restaurant had served the same red sauce since 1994. The lunch rush offered a comforting loop of predictability. Rushed businessmen, elderly regulars, and lost tourists. Lena craved this rhythm. She found peace knowing Table 7 always wanted extra bread, and the lady at 12 would return her salad exactly once. It was a safe world. She could survive on autopilot. Pushing through the kitchen doors, Maria caught sight of her powdered face. "You look like hell," she murmured softly. "Rough night?" Lena offered only a numb hum. Maria never dug for the tragic details. She simply handed over the worn order pad and pointed her toward the dining room floor. The morning passed in a quiet haze. Lena flowed through her tasks like a ghost, pouring water and flashing a practiced smile. The smile was pure muscle memory, completely severed from her broken soul. At table 9, a couple sat with their hands tenderly intertwined. Lena took their order, refusing to imagine what physical touch might feel like if it wasn't rooted in violent possession. By noon, the heavy lunch rush hit. The room exploded into chaos, the kitchen screaming out tickets. Lena darted between tables, her mind gloriously empty. This frantic pace was her daily morphine. Balancing hot plates, she finally felt like a real human being with a purpose, rather than a terrified prisoner dreading the long walk back to her personal hell. She was clearing glasses when Maria suddenly grabbed her arm tightly. "Section 2, Table 11, VIPs," Maria whispered wide-eyed. "Angelo comped their wine. Since when does he give anything away?" Lena glanced over. 3 men sat in suits, costing more than her yearly rent. 2 leaned back with the dangerous ease of predators who owned the world and never apologized for taking up space. The 3rd man sat perfectly still, radiating a chilling, quiet authority. "I will handle it," Lena breathed. The floor felt miles long as she approached. She was used to arrogant men with platinum cards and gold watches. They tipped heavy if you kept your mouth shut and the glasses full. Drawing her order pad, Lena plastered on her flawless, hollow mask of polite hospitality. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said, stepping into their heavy orbit. "My name is Lena. I will take care of you today. Can I start you off with?" The words withered in her throat as the 3rd man looked up. His dark eyes locked onto hers, piercing her with terrifying clarity. "Water," he said, his voice a low rumble of absolute control. "For all of us." Lena nodded mechanically, her pen scratching useless marks. The others ordered, but the words sounded underwater. She felt the leader's heavy gaze burning her skin, a weight making her pulse flutter. Catching her reflection in the glass, Lena saw her makeup was flawless. The dark bruise was buried. So why did it feel like he had stared straight through to her broken bones? "You and I know dangerous men like this, don't we?" Adrian Castellano read human souls the way others read ledgers. In his ruthless underworld, a missed detail meant a bullet, and trust was a fatal weakness. Adrian could spot a liar at 50 paces. He tasted fear before it registered, finding leverage in the smallest twitch. He knew instantly the waitress was terrified, yet dangerously good at hiding it. "She is pretty," Marco chuckled as Lena walked away. Marco was useful for spilling blood, but observation was not his strength. "Focus on your food," Adrian snapped, freezing the air. Dante watched his boss with calculating eyes. "Something interesting?" Dante mused. Adrian did not answer. His dark eyes tracked Lena across the room. Her steps were efficient, but he saw the microscopic flinch in her shoulders. It was the stiff movement of a soul managing a fresh, agonizing trauma. A harsh reminder that everyone you meet is fighting a brutal battle you know nothing about. You and I, we know the look. Heavy foundation on one side of her face, applied with a desperate skill born from survival. Adrian knew it, too. In his brutal world, violence brought power, and he had seen that painted mask 1,000 times. But here, it snagged something buried deep in his chest. "No, nothing interesting," he muttered to Dante. The food arrived, but Adrian tasted nothing. His eyes stayed locked on the waitress 3 tables away. She moved like a ghost, folding her shoulders inward, begging the world not to look. But he looked. He saw her hand shaking as she took his foot. He saw her bracing herself, holding her body with a terrifying, fragile care, like a woman guarding shattered ribs. Sometimes, the heaviest burdens are the ones we hide in plain sight. He caught that exact heartbeat, where she felt his eyes on her. A raw flash of panic washed over her face before she buried it beneath a hollow, practiced smile. "Everything okay?" she asked. Her voice was steady, empty. "Fine," Adrian replied. "The check, please." She vanished. Marco kept rambling about logistics, but Adrian was miles away. He was haunted by the quiet terror in her eyes, the dark bruise under cheap powder. He told himself it was none of his business. He built his empire on knowing exactly when to walk away. Life is messy enough without adopting a stranger's midnight tragedy. The bill came. Adrian dropped enough cash to cover it twice and stood up. They almost made it out before he froze. "Problem?" Dante asked. Adrian just stared back at the woman, wiping down their table, trapped in her own silent storm. He watched the cheap makeup melting under the harsh diner lights, watched her darting eyes map out exit routes. "Get me her name," Adrian murmured. "Full name, address, everything." Dante did not blink. "Everything?" he asked. "Everything." Adrian pushed through the glass doors, letting the cool breeze hit his face. What was the plan? He had no idea. He just knew that turning his back on her felt impossible. "And then I will decide," he said. Back inside, the rest of Lena's shift bled together. When she found $200 on a $70 tab, she counted the bills 3 separate times. Her tired mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was just pity. Men with too much money often throw it around to feel powerful. But true kindness, friends, is rarely found at the bottom of a restaurant receipt. Or maybe they were just showing off. But the way that quiet stranger had looked at her cut much deeper. Lena shoved the crumpled bills into her pocket, trying to block out his stare. He had looked at her like he was reading a tragic story she spent every hour trying to hide. It is a terrifying thing, you and I know, to be truly seen when you are fighting so hard to remain invisible. By the time she clocked out, her ribs burned like hot iron, and the painkillers were long gone. She slipped into the dirty staff bathroom to change, keeping her eyes away from the mirror. The long bus ride home cost money she desperately needed. Sitting in the back, Lena pressed her aching forehead against the cold glass. She watched the bright city bleed past her. Millions of illuminated windows, each holding a different, impossibly normal life. She watched other people's dramas unfold between the buildings. Sometimes she would dream of having normal problems, bad dates, annoying bosses, late bills. Anything that did not involve mapping out the safest retreat to the front door, or memorizing the exact footstep that meant she was about to bleed. Her building loomed ahead, a block of tired concrete. Every step up the stairs was a brutal negotiation with her shattered ribs. The hall smelled of stale smoke. A baby cried. A television hummed. The beautiful soundtrack of normal human existence. But as her shaking hand slid the key into the lock, her blood ran cold. Eric was home. She could feel his suffocating pressure before the door even opened. It is a tragic truth how fear turns us into meteorologists, always sensing the deadly storms before they strike. "You are late." His voice drifted from the dark living room, eyes glued to the glowing television, not angry yet, just laying down facts. "The bus was running slow," Lena whispered, placing her bag down with agonizing care. "How was your day?" "Fine," he grunted. She exhaled quietly. He was indifferent tonight, not hunting for a reason to break things. She could survive this. "I will start dinner," she offered softly. She moved into the cramped kitchen, reaching for cheap pasta. Every stretch was pure agony on her ribs, but pain was just another roommate now. You can get used to absolutely anything if you endure it long enough. Then the air in the kitchen shifted. She felt his shadow drop over her before she heard him. "Smells good," he murmured, stepping far too close. His heavy hand clamped down on her bruised shoulder, a silent, terrifying claim of ownership. His grip was not crushing her yet, but the promise of violence hummed beneath his skin. "You are good at this," he whispered, "taking care of things." Lena stared into the boiling pot, stirring the sauce. "Thanks. Look, I am sorry, Avad, about last night." His tone shifted into that practiced gravel he used when he wanted forgiveness or a warm bed. "Work has been crazy. I did not mean for things to get out of hand." Out of hand. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask how launching her into a porcelain sink was just a little mistake. She wanted to know why his bad day meant she had to taste her own blood on the floor. But survival means knowing your lines. "It is okay," she lied. "The saddest lesson we learn in the dark is that truth only makes the monster hit harder." So she swallowed her pride, played her part, and hoped to see tomorrow. Eric laid his hand on Lena's shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to send a cold reminder that he could hurt her if he wanted to. "I love you, you know that?" he asked. Lena murmured that they were good. She listened to his footsteps fade away, followed by the dull roar of the television. Standing frozen at the stove, she stirred her burning pasta sauce. She knew something was bound to shatter soon. The truly terrifying part wasn't the thought that he might kill her, but the realization that she might stop caring enough to fight back. Meanwhile, miles above her private hell, Adrian Castellano stood in his top-floor office, staring down at the sprawling city lights. It was a beautiful view of a broken world, a view most people would never see. At 8 p.m. sharp, Dante walked into the office and dropped a thick folder onto the heavy desk. "Her name is Lena," Dante said. 26, works at a local diner, clean record, and barely scraping by on minimum wage. Adrian slowly opened the file. A washed-out photo stared back at him. She looked so much younger there, untouched by the exhaustion that now dragged her down. "Married?" Adrian asked quietly. Dante nodded. 2 years to an unemployed guy named Eric Hale. The man has an ugly history of assault and public drunkenness. Nothing that kept him locked up, but it paints a nasty picture. "No recent charges stuck," Dante added, "but the local police have responded to multiple domestic disturbance calls at their apartment. 5 police calls, 0 arrests since." Adrian studied the file. "You and I know exactly how these tragic stories go." Her bank account barely held $300. Secret medical records revealed 2 hospital visits for injuries that clearly came from a fist, not a clumsy fall. Dante asked why they were digging into a waitress's life. Adrian closed the folder, asking how hard it would be to watch her home. Dante said it would be easy, but asked if Adrian really wanted to cross that line. Honestly, Adrian wanted to walk away. He had enough blood on his hands without taking on a stranger's burden, but he couldn't erase her face from his mind. He kept remembering the dark bruise hidden under her makeup, and the desperate way she smiled to pretend her daily life wasn't a living nightmare. "Yes," Adrian said, "a 24-hour watch. I need to know everyone who visits that apartment. I want to know where the husband goes." "And her?" Dante asked. "Especially her." Dante nodded, asking if his boss was planning something stupid. Adrian met his gaze, valuing their unspoken loyalty. "Probably," Adrian admitted. Dante grabbed the folder, promising the watch would be live by morning. Learn his daily routine too, Adrian added. Find out exactly where Eric drinks. Left alone, Adrian turned back to the dark window. Millions of people lived out there. He had learned long ago that you simply cannot save everyone. The hard truth is that you cannot fix every broken soul you find. The world is full of cruel people breaking each other, and stepping in usually just brings more blood. But some complications are worth the mess. Adrian poured a glass of scotch, staring into the night. His mind lingered on her hidden bruises. There is an agonizing rage that burns when you see someone hurt without a way to fight back. He had built his empire on cold control, where emotion usually meant an early grave. But stick with me here, because this is a truth we all face. The most vital choices we make have nothing to do with logic, and everything to do with the person we choose to be in the dark. 3 days later, Lena was rushing through her shift when she felt that suffocating weight again. The hairs on her neck stood up. She spun around quickly, bracing for a threat, but the noisy restaurant was just a blur of oblivious, laughing strangers. Lena tried to shake off the chills, but the heavy feeling stayed. Unseen eyes were tracking her. She told herself it was paranoia. Eric had been a ticking time bomb, forcing her to sleep in her clothes in case she had to flee in the dark. Living in constant fear makes you jump at shadows, but a quiet voice wondered if someone really was watching. That thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like a tragic spark of hope, proving exactly how desperate she had become. By 7 in the morning, fresh surveillance photos landed on Adrian's desk. They formed a grim timeline of degradation, making a cold fury settle deep in his chest. The first picture showed Eric leaving his home at 9, already stumbling. By 11, the miserable husband was slumped at a cheap downtown bar. The next photo showed Eric with men who had crawled from the same gutter, passing a paper bag. By 4, he was stumbling home, flushed and angry, but the night photos made Adrian's jaw clench. Lena leaving for work, makeup painted on to hide the pain. Then Lena returning at midnight, dragging herself up the stairs. The window light clicked on. 20 agonizing minutes later, it went black. The camera couldn't capture the nightmare inside that gap, but Adrian's mind easily filled in the violent blanks. He has a routine, Dante murmured. He drinks with small-time dealers. Losers chasing a high. Dante frowned. Where does a jobless man get the cash? Her tips, Adrian replied. His voice was absolute ice. She works herself to the bone just to hand over the money she needs to survive. He drains every cent she earns, Adrian murmured, flipping through the photos. Lena at a store, counting dimes. Lena freezing at a bus stop. In every frame, she glanced over her shoulder. Terrified, a monster was creeping up behind her. Want me to have a conversation with him? Dante asked. His tone was casual. But you and I know what Dante's conversations look like. They usually end in broken bones. Not yet, Adrian replied. Do you have a plan? Adrian stayed silent. He was paralyzed by the image of a woman working herself to death just to fund her own abuse. He despised this ugly machinery, grinding away while society politely looked the other way. I am working on it, he whispered. What he didn't say was that a dark, inevitable solution was already locking into place. He built an empire on applying fatal pressure. The rules were the same here. Find the weakness, apply leverage, erase the obstacle. The trick was saving her without becoming another monster she'd have to escape. She couldn't just trade cages.
Keep the watch active,
Adrian ordered. Get daily reports on the rats he drinks with. Dante nodded. You are being thorough. I am being careful, Adrian corrected. Dante tapped the photo of the drunken husband. Does she know you are watching? No. Will you tell her eventually? Adrian murmured, locking the photos away. Alone again, Adrian stared out his window, watching traffic crawl through the city below. People lived their daily lives, completely unaware that men in high towers were making silent decisions that would soon rewrite a stranger's fate. Miles away, Adrian looked out over the city skyline. He thought about Lita Torres, trapped in one of those concrete boxes, covering another bruise, rehearsing another lie to protect a man who was slowly killing her. For him, the question was never if he would intervene. The only mystery was whether she would let him. Listen to me. We all need a lifeline, but reaching for it is the hardest part. The next morning at the diner, Lena was filling salt shakers when Maria slid into the booth. She had that heavy, knowing look. So, Maria sighed, "Are you going to tell me the truth, or do we keep pretending?" "Everything is fine," Lena whispered. Maria leaned in, her eyes filled with gentle fire. "Lena, I see the makeup. I see you flinch. I am not stupid." Lena just watched the white salt pour into the glass, feeling entirely trapped. Watching the salt was easier than meeting Maria's eyes. That genuine concern was a warmth Lena did not know how to accept. "It is complicated," Lena mumbled. "You do not understand." Maria leaned closer. "Then explain it, because from where I sit, someone is hurting you, and friends do not just watch." The words lodged in Lena's throat like glass. How could she explain that walking out was a death sentence? She had tried to escape once, and he found her at the bus station, and the beating that followed kept her locked in the dark for a week. She learned the agonizing lesson: running only sharpens the monster's teeth. "I am handling it," Lena lied. "I am still here, aren't I?" Maria stayed quiet for a painfully long time. Then she reached across the cheap table and wrapped her warm, calloused hand around Lena's, a silent anchor in a raging, endless sea. "You and I have probably both known someone trying to smile through a living nightmare." Maria leaned in, the diner lights casting long shadows across her face. "Listen to me," she murmured. "I had a sister. Had. Past tense." She explained how her sister claimed to have it under control, right until they found her shattered body 3 years ago. Lena felt something crack inside her chest. Maria squeezed her hands, warning her that violent men never magically heal. They only escalate. "I don't know what to do," Lena finally breathed. It was the terrified confession of a woman realizing the walls were closing in, knowing that every extra day meant stepping closer to becoming a tragic, forgotten statistic. Maria looked at her with heavy eyes. "You pack a bag, you walk out, and you never look back." Lena offered the usual desperate excuses. He would just hunt her down. Maria insisted there were safe houses and people who pull victims out of the dark. But Lena pulled her hands away, reaching for the salt shakers. That mindless routine was the only thing she could control in a world spinning off its axis. "I'll think about it," she whispered. It was a hollow lie. The afternoon rush arrived without mercy. Lena pushed through the chaos, her bruised ribs feeling like jagged glass shifting with every single breath. She refused to stop, because stopping meant facing the terrifying truth that Maria was right, and that her time was rapidly running out. It happened while wiping down a corner table, that crawling sensation of eyes locked onto her. Lena turned, but her gaze collided with a total stranger at table 14. He sat perfectly still, his attention entirely consumed by her. He gave a slow, knowing nod, acknowledging a secret they shared in the dark. Her pulse hammered against her damaged ribs. She forced herself to stack the dirty plates, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped them. By the time her shift ended, That same suffocating scrutiny had followed her from 3 different strangers. Her nerves were shredded. She changed clothes quickly, avoiding the mirror, and hurried out. She had walked to that bus stop 1,000 times before, but tonight the shadows felt like they had teeth. She made it half a block before the sound registered. Footsteps, steady, deliberate, matching her own terrified rhythm step for step. A frantic glance over her shoulder confirmed her worst fear. It was one of the watchers from the diner. Panic flooded her bloodstream. Lena bolted, her bag slapping against her hip as she gasped for air, the jagged pain in her chest pulling her under. But she was never going to make it. A heavy hand clamped around her wrist, stopping her cold. She screamed, swinging blindly, but the man caught her arm with a calm grip. "I am not going to hurt you," he said smoothly. "My name is Dante. I work for Adrian Castellano, and he wants a word." Lena just stood there, drowning in adrenaline, trying to process the absolute chaos. "Stick with me here, because this is where everything changes." "Who?" she gasped. Dante calmly reminded her of the wealthy man she had served last week. He explained a car was waiting, that his employer wanted to discuss her situation. Lena scrambled for her mask, her voice pitching up in denial. She insisted she had no situation. But Dante looked at her with deep pity, laying out the brutal facts, the hidden bruises, the husband drinking away her tips, the reality that she was one bad night away from the morgue. His words struck harder than a fist. How did this stranger see through the fortress of lies she built to survive? "I don't know what you mean," she stammered, instinctively correcting him when he called her Mrs. Hale. She had not felt like a true wife in years. Dante offered a gentle nod. He knew she was terrified, but he promised his employer was offering a real lifeline. "Why would he care about a nobody like me?" she demanded. Before Dante could answer, a sleek black sedan rolled up to the curb. The door swung open, and the man from the diner stepped out. Adrian Castellano moved with the effortless grace of someone who owned the city, wearing a suit worth more than her life, yet his dark eyes held a heavy, ancient sorrow. He spoke her name with a strange gravity, apologizing for the ambush. When she accused him of watching her, he didn't deflect or spin polite excuses. He just looked at her directly and said yes. That stark, unfiltered honesty completely disarmed the defensive walls she had spent painful years building up. "Why?" she demanded, shivering in the cool night air. Adrian stepped closer, and for the first time, she did not flinch. "Because you needed someone to notice," he murmured. He peeled back the tragic layers of her life with precision. He knew about the drunken rages, the hospital visits covered by clumsy lies, the sheer sort of paying for her own torment. Every truth dismantled her denial until she had nowhere to hide. When she asked what he wanted in return, his answer anchored her to the pavement. "Nothing," he said quietly, "just to help." Lena searched his face, trying to understand. "You and I know the world rarely gives something for nothing. What kind of powerful man stops in the dark just to save a broken waitress?" He promised her the kind of sanctuary that would make her husband understand that touching her again meant his own death. "I still don't understand why you care," she whispered. A deep shadow fell over Adrian's eyes. "My mother stayed with my father for 15 years, he confessed, his voice thick with grief. He spoke of the man who used to tuck him in during thunderstorms, the exact same father who became the monster that shattered their home. When his mother finally tried to run, his father murdered her in a parking lot. Adrian was only 12. Watching the man who gave him life destroy the woman he loved, it is a harsh truth we must all learn. Sometimes the very people supposed to protect us are the exact ones we need to be protected from. Tears pricked Lena's eyes. I am so sorry, she breathed. Adrian held her gaze, fueled by the ghosts of his past. He had spent his youth praying for a stranger to save his mother. Now, holding that power, he refused to walk away from a woman suffering in the dark. The choice is yours, he said softly. She could return to her apartment and wait for the inevitable, or step into his car and vanish. His people would handle everything. Her husband would learn that her shadow was no longer his to chase. She could disappear and finally breathe again. This stranger was offering the one thing she thought she had lost forever, a real tomorrow. She stood on the edge of the curb, realizing that sometimes survival means finally letting someone else fight for you. Let's walk through this moment together, you and I. Adrian offered her everything: money, lawyers, a wall of security. Lena asked why he would do this for a stranger. He smiled a hollow, haunted smile. Because I can, he murmured, voice heavy with angst. He hoped his late mother was watching, hoping she'd see one woman finally get a lifeline. Lena closed her eyes, remembering the suffocating prison of her apartment. She saw Eric, his fists coiled, the cold bathroom floor. She thought of the women who never made it out. When she opened her eyes, Adrian was waiting. Steady. Okay, she whispered. The word felt like stepping off a ledge into the pitch black. Help me. Adrian gave a single nod. Pack what matters, he told her. Leave the rest. Fear clawed at her throat. What about Eric? Adrian checked his phone, completely calm. Eric was anchored at Murphy's bar for at least 2 hours. Knowing a monster's schedule so intimately should have sent ice down Lena's spine. Instead, it felt like a warm blanket. For the first time, someone was standing guard in her corner. Dante opened the car door. Lena took a shivering breath, standing on the edge of her new life, and got in. Walking into her apartment to pack, the walls seemed to shrink. Every hole Eric had punched in the drywall stared back like a bruised eye. The broken things she had trained herself to ignore suddenly screamed the truth of her misery. Dante waited by the door, a silent sentinel, while she grabbed a faded duffel bag and tossed her shattered life inside. She didn't take it all. Adrian promised to replace the clutter. She packed the heartbeats, her best jeans, her late grandmother's sweater, the photo album from before Eric's shadow darkened her door. In the bathroom, she caught her reflection and froze. The makeup was fading, revealing the raw edges of the bruise on her cheek and her split lip. For the first time in 2 agonizing years, her fingers didn't reach for the concealer. She let the damage breathe. Dante called from the hall, giving her 10 minutes. Lena took one final look around. She stared at the lumpy couch where she had cried herself to sleep, the kitchen where she learned to move like a ghost, and the bedroom where she had ceased to be a living woman, becoming nothing more than a tragedy to Zampa's survive. She told him she was ready. 3 blocks away, the car's silence was shattered by her phone. Eric's name flashed, a digital leash pulling tight. Her thumb hovered, shaking. Dante's voice was a low rumble. He told her not to answer, that she owed that man nothing. The phone screamed, went to voicemail, then started ringing again. With a trembling sigh, Lena powered the device down, severing the cord. The safe house was tucked into a leafy neighborhood, a world away from the gutter she had just escaped. Dante led her to a 3rd-floor apartment. He pointed out the stocked fridge and clothes, warning her to keep her cell dark. Then he vanished, leaving Lena alone in a beautiful sunlit room with windows that actually let the light pour in. The appliances actually worked, free of duct tape and desperation. The bathroom door had a heavy lock on the inside. She sank onto the couch, waiting for the crushing panic, the suffocating guilt, the cruel voice whispering she had made a fatal mistake. But the silence remained unbroken. There was only a weeping relief. An hour later, Adrian walked in to find her in that exact spot, digesting the impossible reality that she was free. He sat across from her, his deep voice softening, asking how she felt. She stared at her hands, confessing she only felt tired. He leaned in, an anchor in her storm. He told her she had been running on pure terror for 2 years. Her broken body was finally trying to catch up. "Take your time," he murmured. "Tonight is just for rest. The legal work starts tomorrow." He promised divorce papers, restraining orders, and separate accounts. His lawyers would handle the details, but Lena's mind drifted to the monster. What about Eric? Adrian's face turned to carved granite. "Eric," he murmured, "is being handled." He was about to learn that touching her again would be his final mistake. The cold certainty in Adrian's baritone should have terrified her. She should have feared a man making such violent threats. Instead, she felt only deep gratitude. Finally, a wall stood between her and the beast that tried to swallow her whole. She whispered her thanks, but he waved it off. Mystery still ate at her. She asked the question, burning on her tongue. "Why are you really doing this?" Adrian went dead silent, a storm of buried grief flickering behind his dark eyes. "Listen closely. You and I know the heavy silence of a broken heart, don't we?" Adrian's eyes carried the ghosts of 20 years as he confessed his darkest truth. He was 12 when he hid in a closet, utterly powerless, listening as his own father took his mother's life. His underworld empire meant nothing if he couldn't save someone else from that exact nightmare. The raw honesty stole Lena's breath. She expected a cold strategist, not a man with grief still cutting to the bone. She whispered a fragile apology, but Adrian rejected her pity. He just wanted to be the shield his mother never had. 2 shattered souls sat in that pristine room, staring at the wreckage of their pasts. Adrian finally stood up, his deep voice soft but firm. He offered her food, clothes, and promised Dante was guarding the door. "Tomorrow," he said, "they would fix this." He was at the door when Lena spoke. She swore, her voice trembling, that she would pay him back once the nightmare ended. Adrian's jaw softened. He told her the only payment he wanted was her safety. The rest was just noise. Left alone, Lena drifted through the quiet rooms, touching the fresh linens, tracing the lock on the bathroom door. Things she used to take for granted were now miracles. Stepping under the hot water, the dam broke. 2 heavy Victoria washed down the drain, along with her careful mask of control. Dressed in clean clothes, smelling of sweet lavender, she crawled under the covers. Closing her eyes, the familiar pit of dread was gone. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is simply allow ourselves to rest. Morning brought golden sunlight and no trace of regret. For 1 second, her mind was blank. Then the memories rushed in. The escape, the long ride, Adrian's steady promise of a new life. She held her breath and listened. Nothing. No heavy boots pacing. No awful clink of glass bottles. And no sound of Eric's rage. Just unbroken peace. Her phone remained powered down. She already knew the toxic cycle waiting behind that black screen. Eric would have called 100 times, leaving voicemails that began with weeping apologies and ended in vicious threats. We have all seen how manipulators use guilt as a literal weapon, haven't we? But today was entirely different. She wasn't shivering in a dirty bus terminal with $40 to her name. For the very first time, a true protector was standing in her corner. Walking to the closet, she found thick denim jeans and soft shirts that felt like an absolute blessing against her skin. Every detail had been handled with precision. A new toothbrush rested on the sink, and the shampoo smelled of rich botanicals. The kitchen was stocked with fresh bread, real butter, and dark coffee. Lena cooked a quiet breakfast. Eating alone, she realized she couldn't remember the last time her stomach wasn't tied in knots. The simple taste of a warm meal felt like a tiny miracle. She was rinsing her plate when 3 disciplined knocks echoed. Dante announced his presence. Lena opened the heavy door to find the bodyguard beside a sharp woman in a tailored suit. Her eyes were cold, professional, unshockable. Dante introduced Catherine Morris, the attorney Adrian had sent. The lawyer extended a commanding hand, asking calmly if Lena was ready to file for divorce. That singular word hung in the quiet air, heavy, absolute. It felt like striking a match and watching her old life burn. Lena forced the word out. Yes, she was ready. They sat at the dining table as Catherine produced a thick stack of legal documents. The lawyer needed the bleak arithmetic of Lena's marriage, the shared accounts, the non-existent assets. The first move was an emergency protective order to freeze her husband in his tracks. Lena asked the question that terrified her most. How long? Catherine explained the timeline, assuring her the restraining order was immediate. If he crossed that line, he went to a jail cell. But Lena's heart hammered in her chest. She knew the monster she had married. Eric never accepted defeat. He was the kind of man who would scorch the earth rather than let his victim walk free. Her voice trembled as she asked what would happen when Eric inevitably ignored the judge's paper. Catherine's face remained utterly stoic. It was the look of a seasoned warrior. She simply promised that if he pushed back, they would bring the fire to his front door. Catherine leaned closer, her voice dropping. She reminded Lena that being under Adrian Castellano's wing carried immense weight. Eric might tear up a judge's order, but he couldn't survive the wrath of the underworld if he laid another finger on her. That dark certainty should have been terrifying, but for Lena, it was pure comfort. For 2 grueling hours, they waded through the wreckage. Catherine asked clinical questions, making the pain easier to swallow. 2 years married, 0 property, 1 bank account Eric controlled. Then came the darkest question. Were there previous incidents of violence? Lena's voice went flat as she confessed to the endless cycle of beatings. Catherine didn't flinch. She just calmly asked for the paper trail, the medical files, the police reports. Lena quietly mentioned her desperate trips to the emergency room. The lawyer nodded. Those horrific nights of survival were now the exact weapons that would finally set her free. Catherine's pen scratched a steady rhythm against the yellow, legal pad. She pressed for police reports, but Lena slowly shook her head, a familiar shame tightening her throat. She had lied to the cops, desperately claiming the beatings were just clumsy accidents. It is a tragic script. Too many survivors are forced to memorize, isn't it? Catherine didn't judge her. She just pivoted, asking for anyone who might have witnessed the bruising. Maria from the Italian restaurant immediately sparked in Lena's mind. She was the one person who had tried to throw a lifeline, but when asked for more names, a bitter sadness washed over Lena's. She thought of her neighbors, the people who absolutely heard the shattering glass and muffled screams through the thin walls, but chose to look the other way. Dozens of silent witnesses to her slow destruction. Seeing the deep guilt radiating from the young woman, Catherine gently closed her heavy folder and held Lena's tired gaze. The attorney's voice cut through the toxic fog in Lena's mind. She told her point blank that she wasn't the one committing a betrayal. Eric had shattered their vows every single time he raised his fist. They were simply putting the death of that marriage on legal paper. Hearing those words dissolved a heavy stone Lena hadn't realized she was carrying. When she asked how soon they could file, Catherine didn't hesitate. Today, by tomorrow's sunrise, a legal wall would stand between Lena and her monster. The lawyer packed her briefcase, leaving behind strict orders. Do not leave the safe house. Do not reach out. Do not look in the rearview mirror. When the door clicked shut, the profound silence returned. Less than 24 hours ago, Lena was a beaten prisoner. Now, she was a ghost in the system. She sat on the sofa and picked up her dead cell phone. It felt like holding a live grenade. A twisted curiosity clawed at her mind, urging her to power it on just to measure the sheer size of Eric's wrath. Half of her soul wanted to hurl that phone into the trash and erase him from existence. But trauma creates a powerful gravity, doesn't it? She struck a dangerous compromise. Her thumb pressed the power button, the screen illuminating her pale face. The numbers flashed like warning sirens. 47 missed calls, 32 furious texts. Before the poison could seep in and she killed the power, his rage didn't belong in this quiet sanctuary. As the afternoon stretched out, Lena wandered the rooms like a tourist. The hot water flowed endlessly. The mattress was soft. This beautiful normalcy felt almost offensive after 2 years in a rotting cage. Staring down at the city streets, her mind drifted back to the enigma of Adrian Castellano. A kingpin who had looked across a restaurant and decided her broken life was worth saving. He mobilized lawyers, guards, and a fortress. It completely defied logic. Men, with his kind of underworld power, never handed out absolute miracles to strangers, not without demanding a heavy price. Picture the late-night hours, listeners, that heavy quiet where our deepest fears come out to play. Lena sat there, searching her mind for the invisible hook Adrian must have set. Nothing. He hadn't demanded a single thing. The sheer absence of strings terrified her more than Eric's fists ever did. With a monster like Eric, you know the currency, pain for existence. But this was a phantom economy. At 6, Dante walked in, carrying Thai food that smelled like a world she used to know. Figured. Good, you might not feel like cooking, he said. He laid out the plates, adding, Mr. Castellano wants to check in later. Lena nodded, a cold dread washing over her. Here is a hard truth for tonight, friends. Sometimes the kindness of a stranger is far more terrifying than the devil we know. Can I ask you something? Lena called out, her voice trembling as Dante reached for the door. How long have you worked for him? 8 years, he told her. She pressed, needing to know if this man always played the savior. Dante paused. Adrian had his own code, he explained. Sometimes he saved people. Sometimes he destroyed them. But he never broke his word. You're safe here, Dante promised before stepping into the hall. Alone again, Lena forced down the hot meal, trying desperately to block out the darkness Adrian carried. What kind of empire needs this much shadow to protect one broken woman? The answer was a ghost she wasn't ready to face. You know, we spend so much time running from the wolves. We never stop to ask why the tiger offered us a quiet place in its den. Adrian stepped out of the evening haze at 8 o'clock. No suit tonight, just dark jeans and a black shirt, making the quiet danger in his bones all the more obvious. He sat across from her, carefully keeping that physical distance. The divorce papers were moving, but then came the shadow of Eric. Adrian's voice didn't waver. He was monitoring the abusive ex. Every phone call, every drunken stumble. If he tries to come after you, we'll know before he gets within a mile, Adrian said, his tone chillingly flat. You and I might look at a man who can track a human being like a hunted animal and feel the urge to run. But Lena, she just sat there, breathing out a breath she'd held for 2 years. The lesson is simple. When you have been drowning in chaos, control feels like a raft. The question had been burning a hole in her chest all day. What kind of man pulls strings like a god in the shadows? She looked at him, pleading for the raw truth. Adrian went completely still. You could see the heavy gears turning behind his dark eyes, a mix of calculation and tired resignation. Finally, he gave it to her straight. He ran businesses, some in the daylight, some buried deep in the dirt.
"You're a criminal?"
She breathed out. He didn't flinch, just calmly called himself a businessman who ignores inconvenient laws. He asked if that chased her away. Lena sat there, flashing back to the cops, who did nothing, while Eric bruised her ribs time and time again. Here is the tragic reality. Morality means absolutely nothing when the righteous leave you bleeding on the floor. She thought about all the systems of justice that had turned a blind eye to her suffering. "No," she whispered softly. "It doesn't change a thing." A ghost of a smile touched Adrian's lips. He confessed he wasn't used to people skipping the moral lecture, but Lena was done with the high ground. She had spent 2 years drowning in pain while playing by the rules. The law had only ever protected her abuser. "You have done more for me in 2 days than anyone else did in 2 years, she told him. Adrian stared at her, his eyes weighing her soul, testing if she was truly ready to step into his dark world. Finally, he nodded. A powerful lesson we all learn eventually. The right thing and the legal thing are rarely the same. Sometimes, our only salvation wears the mask of a villain. The room settled into an intimate quiet. Outside, the city pulsed with its midnight rhythm. Blind to the fragile bond forming in this room, Lena asked what would happen next. Adrian mapped it out with cold precision. They file the papers, the order drops, and they wait. "And if he doesn't respond well?" she asked. Adrian didn't blink. "Then we escalate." He stood to leave, and Lena felt an aching hollow in her chest. Before he could walk out, she asked the question haunting her. Out of all the broken souls in this grey city, why her? Adrian froze. The untouchable man suddenly looked lost, searching for words that kept slipping through his fingers. We often demand logic from the universe, but the most life-altering connections are almost always born from pure, irrational instinct. "I saw you at that restaurant," Adrian confessed. He had seen the terror bleeding through her forced smile, and something inside his hardened chest clicked. Walking away simply wasn't an option. After he left, Lena stood by the cold glass, tracking his taillights until they melted into the dark streets. She was tying her fate to a man bathed in shadows, but as she closed her eyes, she realized she was safer than she had been in years. Morning broke with the cold reality of consequence. Catherine called. The order was signed, and Eric had been served by a process server backed by the police. Lena's stomach twisted into tight knots. Here is a bitter truth of human nature to remember. The exact moment an abuser loses their control over you is the moment they become the most dangerous. They warned Eric that one misstep meant handcuffs, but Catherine's pause on the line revealed the terrifying truth. Men like him do not let go. A cold dread settled into Lena's bones. You and I know this feeling, right? That suffocating weight when you realize the storm is just gathering strength. Eric would never sign those papers. In his twisted mind, she was his property. And when he felt robbed, someone always paid the price. The morning dragged like an open wound. She tried the television, a book, anything to quiet her mind, but his shadow poisoned her every thought. At noon, Dante knocked with news. Here is a harsh truth about life. Escaping a toxic past is rarely the end of the pain. Often, it is just the start of a harder fight. Dante set a bag on the table, his voice dead flat. Eric was making noise, pressing street-level ghosts to find her. Lena's throat turned to sand. Dante's eyes held a grim certainty. No one was talking, because helping Eric was a known death sentence. He called her husband predictable, which meant manageable. But fear never listens to logic. Later that day, the apartment landline shattered the quiet. Lena stared at the receiver, her chest tight. Nobody had this number. On the fourth ring, she finally answered. It was Eric. His voice was a toxic mix of slurred anger and deep obsession, demanding answers about the legal order. She gripped the plastic, begging to know how he found her. He ignored her, ordering her to return. Life teaches us a dark truth. Sometimes, the monsters we run from are the ones who know our shadows the absolute best. Eric swore they could fix things, his tone heavy with fake redemption. But Lena stood firm. It was over. His response was a harsh, ugly laugh. He hissed that she didn't get to decide when it ended. His voice climbed, hitting that terrifying pitch that always preceded bruised skin. He told her she belonged to him. The sheer entitlement was suffocating. Just then, Dante stepped into the room, Lena signaling her to cut the call. Lena told Eric to never call again, finding a steady voice. He mocked her, warning that her new protectors would eventually abandon her. She slammed the phone down. When it screamed again, Dante calmly ripped the cord from the wall. He checked his screen, confirming they had traced the burner's location. Listen to me on this. True courage is not the absence of terror. It is simply hanging up the phone while the devil is still whispering. The trace pointed to his usual haunt. But the real question remained, how did he get this unlisted number? Dante's face shifted into pure, cold professionalism. He ordered her to pack a bag. They were moving her to Adrian Castellano's private estate, a guarded fortress outside the city. Lena wanted to fight back, tired of running like a hunted animal. But the echo of Eric's voice still clawed at her mind. That blind rage. That terrifying certainty that he owned her soul. She shoved her clothes into the duffel bag, her hands shaking. Dante was already snapping quiet orders into his phone. Soon they were in a car, speeding 40 minutes north. The gritty city faded into quiet wealth, where massive mansions hid behind iron gates and security cameras. When we are forced to flee, we often trade one prison for another. Sometimes, survival just means finding a cage with much stronger locks. The estate's heavy security whispered a clear message. The owner demanded privacy and had the brutal means to enforce it. The house was massive, built of clean lines and quiet wealth. Dante guided her inside, where a housekeeper named Rosa waited with a warm smile. Adrian had called ahead. Lena followed her up a curved staircase into a bedroom that completely dwarfed her old apartment. Tall windows framed perfectly manicured gardens. The vast bed was draped in silk that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Lena whispered that it was simply too much. Rosa just smiled, noting that Castellano never did anything halfway. Left alone to rest, Lena sank onto the edge of the lavish mattress, her mind spinning wildly. Here is a strange truth about trauma. When you have spent your whole life bracing for the next violent punch, genuine safety can feel dangerously like a trap. 3 days ago, she peeled her bruised body off a cold bathroom floor. Now, she stood in a sanctuary, shielded by a powerful stranger from a husband who wanted to break her. The absurdity made her blood run cold. She was unpacking when Adrian filled the doorway. His tie was loose, his eyes sharp. He apologized for the breached phone line, promising this house was a vault. Lena turned, her voice trembling. Eric would never stop. In his sick mind, she was his property. Adrian stepped deeper into the room, his dark presence making the vast space feel small. He swore they were going to send Eric a specific message. One detailing exactly what happens to those who threaten what belongs to Adrian. That raw possessiveness should have terrified her. You and I know that trading one master for another is a risky game, but sometimes you need a larger monster to keep the old wolves away. Adrian's possessiveness carried a different weight. It lacked the poison of Eric's control, offering a shield of protection instead. Lena softly reminded him that she did not belong to him. Adrian agreed, but in his dangerous world, being under his protection meant the exact same thing to anyone foolish enough to cross the line. She asked the question, burning in her lungs. What would he do to Eric? Adrian let the silence stretch. He planned to show Eric how violently narrow his options were. He could take the divorce and vanish, or keep pushing and find out what lived in the shadows. Lena realized he fully intended to hurt her husband. The terrifying part? His calm certainty did not sicken her. It brought profound relief. A deep lesson we eventually learn is that not all violence is equal. There is a vast difference between a fist raised to cage you and a sword drawn to set you free. Welcome to the midnight hour. Tonight, you and I will step into the heavy shadows of a broken soul. Picture Lena, her mind spinning as she tries to survive a world of pure violence. Adrian tells her it happens tonight. Her husband is reckless and Adrian must act before his hand is forced. Lena nods, the quiet room feeling like a tightening vice. She looks at this dangerous man and begs him not to kill her abuser. Surprise flickers in Adrian's cold eyes. Lena refuses to carry that blood, clinging to the hope that she is different from the monsters. Adrian studies her, reading the deep agony in her posture. Finally, he agrees. He will let him live. But the husband must understand his very breath depends on Lena's mercy. The lesson here is simple. Sometimes, true strength is holding back the dark. Adrian asks if she is certain. Once he makes the call, there is no turning back. He warns her that her abuser gets one single chance. If the man steps out of line, if he even whispers her name with the wrong edge, the mercy ends. Lena accepts the terms. Adrian steps into the dim hallway, his low voice murmuring orders into his phone. When he returns, his face is a mask of stone. The visit will happen tonight. He tells her not to thank him, reminding her that gratitude should never sit as low as sparing a life. But underneath his hardened shell, Lena senses something profound. This ruthless man swallowed his brutal instincts just to give her peace. That is a power far deeper than the terror her husband wielded. Feeling a fragile connection, Lena impulsively asks him to stay for dinner. It teaches us a quiet truth. We all seek a safe harbor when the storm rages outside. Adrian is surprised by the dinner invitation. Lena admits she simply wants his company. For a split second, the hardened protector melts and a profound sadness crosses his face. He agrees to stay. They sit at the edge of a massive dining table, the cavernous room feeling strangely intimate. At first, they eat in pure silence. For years, silence meant danger to Lena. It meant holding her breath, waiting for her husband's violent rage to erupt. But tonight, the quiet feels like a warm blanket. Breaking the stillness, she asks about his mother. Adrian slowly sets down his fork, his eyes drifting miles away into the ghosts of his past. He remembers her as kind, perhaps too kind for this brutal world. She was a woman who truly believed that love could repair shattered people. Life teaches us a very harsh truth, my friends. A pure heart cannot always fix what is fundamentally broken in someone else. Adrian stares into his dark wine. His mother was wrong about love saving bad men. It is a bitter truth he and Lena now share. He recalls his mother's cooking, a rare memory untouched by his father's cruelty. Lena asks if he thinks of her often. Every single day, he confesses. He thinks of her when choosing between the man he is and the monster he could become. His sorrowful eyes lock onto Lena. He remembers his mother every time he sees a victim who just needs someone to notice her pain. The emotional weight is crushing. This fierce man who built an empire on fear does it all to honor a woman who died because the world looked away. Lena softly tells him his mother would be proud. But Adrian remains haunted by his own brutal methods. It highlights a tragic truth. We often try to build a shield of safety out of the exact same violence that once broke our hearts. Lena insists there is a difference between blind cruelty and punishing those who deserve it. Adrian questions that thin line, knowing how easily it blurs. They finish their meal talking about lighter things. When his armor slips, Adrian reveals a deeply wounded soul. Over dessert, a profound realization washes over Lena. For the first time in years, she is not planning an escape route. She is not bracing for a blow. She is just existing in a moment that does not ache. As midnight approaches, Adrian stands. He tells her to rest, promising to gauge her husband's reaction tomorrow. If the abuser pushes back, they will adjust. Pausing at the door, his deep voice drops, begging her to believe she is finally safe. She whispers that she is trying. The journey of healing always starts exactly here, giving yourself permission to put down your heavy shield and simply breathe. You and I know that out there in the dark city, Eric is getting a brutal wake-up call. Shadowy men are violently teaching him that his twisted reign over Lena is dead. Meanwhile, Lena stands inside a fortress, shielded by a man who chose compassion over indifference. And her husband will not let go easily, and she does not know the true cost of Adrian's protection. What debts is she silently racking up? But for this solitary night, the breath in her lungs is her own. That fragile peace shatters at 3 a.m. Sleep is a stranger to a body wired for trauma, so Lena is awake when urgent voices echo from the hallway below. It is the distinct sound of a plan crashing down. She steps out to find Dante rushing up the staircase. His grim face tells her everything she needs to know. Sometimes, safety is just a brief, beautiful illusion before the violent storm returns. Lena's heart plummets. She demands to know what happened before Dante can catch his breath. Her abuser is in the hospital. Panic spikes as she asks what they did to him. Dante's jaw is clenched tight. He tells her they gave the man exactly what he earned, but Eric is awake and screaming about pressing charges. The narcissist is playing the victim, threatening to drag this into the glaring spotlight of the media. Lena feels the cold grip of his control reaching out from that hospital bed. Dante leads her downstairs to Adrian's dark, leather-bound office. Adrian stands by the heavy window, a glass of amber liquor in his hand, looking like a king surveying a ruin. Lena asks for the damage. Broken ribs, a fractured wrist, nothing permanent. It brings us to a terrifying realization, doesn't it? Escaping a monster often means the hidden war never truly ends until someone is entirely destroyed. Adrian's voice is dead flat, carrying the icy calm of a man who controls violence. He explains the warning was delivered perfectly, but Eric's twisted pride blinded him. The fool spat at the men, screaming he would track Lena down and make her bleed. So, they broke his bones to prove that words carry a brutal toll. Adrian turns, looking deep into Lena's eyes. He kept his promise. He let the man live. But in his ruthless world, a threat never goes unanswered. Lena sinks into a heavy leather chair, her knees turning to water. Eric is playing a dangerous game now, reporting unknown attackers. Adrian dismisses the legal threat, knowing his empire leaves no loose threads. The police will find nothing. But that is not what truly worries him. What chills the room is the dark realization that Eric's toxic obsession is much stronger than his physical fear. A wounded, desperate abuser only knows how to strike back. Most men understand broken bones. They accept reality and stay away. But Lena knows the dark corners of her husband's mind. Her voice drops to a haunted whisper. It is not bravery driving Eric. It is the agonizing panic of losing dominance. He cannot stomach that she slipped away. When an abuser feels powerless, they create reckless chaos. Lena looks up with horrific certainty. Eric will come for her directly. Adrian's face hardens into pure granite, vowing the man will never get close. But Lena knows he cannot stand guard forever. What happens if Eric never stops coming? Adrian goes perfectly still. The cold calculation in his eyes is chilling. If the abuser refuses to bow, Adrian will execute a permanent solution, erasing her merciful rules. The heavy words hang in the room. You and I know the tragic truth she faces tonight. Sometimes the only way to survive a monster is to let a more dangerous one off the leash. The fractured part of her soul, the part that had bled on too many bathroom tiles, knew the grim truth. Some demons cannot be reasoned with. Lena admitted she didn't want blood spilled, but she refused to be his victim again. Adrian stepped closer, a shadow made of comfort and lethal intent. He promised her it would never come to that, but his voice dropped to a heavy rumble. Eric had declared war the first time he raised his hand. Every brutal thing that followed was simply the echo of his own fatal choice. If Eric ended up in the ground, it was because he invited the Reaper. Lena nervously brought up the law, but Adrian dismissed it with chilling ease. The law was absent. He was the one standing there. He sank into a chair beside her, deep exhaustion carving lines around his dark eyes. He knew she was still praying for a peaceful, civilized exit, but men like Eric are completely immune to peace. Men like Eric never fade quietly. They escalate, burning everything down until a stronger force snaps their spine. Adrian swore he would be that force. Lena studied his face, struggling to reconcile the gentle man who shared midnight cake with her, with the enforcer casually mapping out a murder. It should have been a terrifying contradiction. Instead, it made a twisted kind of sense. Violence and tenderness were simply different tools, wielded to keep her breathing. Lena confessed she was terrified. Adrian gave a low hum of approval. Fear keeps us sharp. He reached out, his solid hand wrapping over hers. It was their first touch not born of rushing her to safety. In that quiet contact, a massive wall inside her chest began to fracture. He had pulled her from the wreckage of her brutal life, asking for absolutely nothing. Sometimes, true salvation arrives wearing a very dark mask. Adrian held her trembling hand in the dead of night, vowing to be the wall between her and the monster. It would be so easy to let herself fall into his world. Easy, dangerous, and completely reckless. Gently, she pulled her hand away. Adrian didn't flinch, promising morning would reveal Eric's next move. Lena thanked him for holding back his violent nature, for not putting a bullet in Eric, even though mercy complicated everything. Everything worth doing complicates things, Adrian murmured. Alone in that vast bed, Lena's mind raced. Sleep was a ghost. She kept picturing her ex, plotting his revenge. Listen closely. Sometimes the hardest part of surviving is not escaping the burning house. It is sitting in the cold dark waiting for the ashes to finally stop smoldering. Trapped in the crossfire, navigating a reality where protection carried the heavy scent of gunpowder. When the pale sun broke through the glass, Lena gave up the fight for sleep. Downstairs, Rosa was humming over fresh coffee. "Too much on my mind," Lena confessed. Rosa slid a warm mug across the counter. "He worries about you," Rosa said softly.
"I haven't seen him care like this in years."
Lena protested. They were practically strangers, but Rosa smiled sadly. She spoke of her own sister, trapped with a cruel man, trying to run, and being dragged right back to the nightmare. The lesson is written in our scars. Listeners, shared pain speaks a language that bypasses time entirely, making absolute strangers feel like lifelong allies in a matter of seconds. Rosa didn't hold back. She told Lena about her own sister, a cleaner, whose purple bruises caught Mr. Castellano's eye. When he learned the truth, he handled it. The abusive husband vanished like smoke, just gone. Now, her sister was free, raising kids in the sunlight. Lena felt her throat tighten now. Rosa shrugged, her face a mask of survival. "Nobody knows," she murmured, "and nobody asks." The implication hung heavy in the room. Adrian erased problems permanently. The only thing keeping Eric breathing was Lena's hesitation. She asked Rosa if she should let Adrian kill him. Rosa slid a plate of food onto the table, replying that she had to live with her choices, but some men simply need to be removed. Dante walked in a moment later, his eyes heavy with deep exhaustion. Dante didn't sugarcoat it. Eric had checked out of the hospital against medical advice and vanished into the subway tunnels. The predator knew he was being watched. Lena dropped her fork, a cold knot twisting in her gut. He was planning something. Dante agreed, showing her the venom Eric had spilled online. The monster was crying victim, claiming his wife had been kidnapped by criminals, begging the public for help. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, desperate, unhinged, and full of lies. Lena asked them to scrub it, but Dante shook his head. The posts weren't the real problem. Eric was building a twisted narrative by playing the helpless victim. If anything violently tragic happened to him now, he would become a martyr, painting them as the absolute villains in the eyes of the world. You and I know how dangerous a cornered animal is. Lena admitted it was a smart, desperate move. Adrian filled the doorway, unbothered by the chaos. He declared they needed to pivot. If Eric played the weeping husband, silencing him with force would only prove his lies right. Lena asked what they could do. Adrian sat down, his dark eyes calculating. "We hand the monster what he wants," he murmured. "A meeting. Controlled, monitored, giving Eric the illusion of power." Dante snapped back, refusing to put Lena in the crosshairs. Adrian called it a calculated risk. Eric needed to see her unbroken, choosing to walk away of her own free will. It would rip the victim narrative right out of his hands. Listening to them debate her life, Lena felt her heart slam frantically against her ribs. The thought of breathing the same air as Eric made Lena physically sick. But Adrian was right. If her tormentor was spinning lies about coercion, she had to shatter that illusion. "I will do it," she said, rushing the words before her courage broke. Dante tried to warn her, but Lena knew Eric would never rest until he tried to drag her back into his hell. "Let him try," she whispered. She looked to Adrian. "You stay close. I am not doing this alone." They chose a bright, crowded cafe for tomorrow, a public stage where control was possible. The truth is, sometimes the only way to banish a monster is to face it in the light of day. The remaining hours blurred into heavy preparation, with her lawyer hoping this gamble might force Eric to expose his true, violent nature. Dante mapped the exits while Adrian directed the room, a man who understood violence but favored control. Lena spent those agonizing hours dreading the reunion. She feared the eyes that once promised love but delivered only agony, dreading the rage hiding behind Eric's mask. By nightfall, she was a fragile wire ready to snap. Adrian found her trembling in the quiet garden. Second thoughts, he asked softly. 1,000, she confessed. He offered an escape, but Lena knew Eric would just keep hunting her. Might as well foot him on our terms, she said. She looked up, begging for the truth. Will he try to hurt me? Adrian let the heavy silence linger. I think he will want to. It is a tragic truth of life. Deeply broken people will always crave the desperate thrill of breaking someone else just to feel powerful again. He knows that hurting you in public would ruin him, Adrian continued. And if you are wrong, she asked, then I will stop him, whatever it takes. His baritone voice vibrated in the dark. He will not lay a hand on you. Eric had poisoned the very concept of promises, but staring into Adrian's eyes, Lena believed him. She trusted this man of shadows to be her shield. I am scared, she whispered. I know, but you are stepping up anyway. That is true courage. It is a vital lesson for all of us tonight. Bravery is not the absence of terror, but moving forward while your soul shakes. They retreated inside to a suffocatingly quiet dinner. The warm food tasted like dry ash, and the dark wine did nothing to calm her racing heart. Adrian simply stayed close, quietly holding on to their fragile, fleeting peace before the storm. He spoke of mundane things like house renovations, building a temporary shelter of words, but his intense gaze kept searching her face, ensuring she had not shattered. Can I ask you something? She murmured. Always, if tomorrow goes wrong, if you have to kill him to protect me, will you regret it? Adrian let the heavy silence breathe. I will regret that it was necessary, he said. I will regret the violence. But will I regret protecting you? Never, even if it means blood. I have done things that would rot your soul, Lena. I do not pretend to be a righteous man. I am just trying to be good to the people who matter. The simple truth is, profound devotion often demands we carry the darkest burdens for the ones we cherish. He held her fragile gaze with terrifying, absolute loyalty. You matter to me, so no, I will not regret a single thing. Adrian looked Lena right in the eyes and admitted he wouldn't regret keeping her abuser alive. Any ordinary woman would have bolted from a man who treated violence like a simple transaction. But Lena didn't feel fear. She felt an overwhelming, bone-deep relief. No more lies, no more walking on eggshells. She looked at him and softly confessed she was finally starting to understand him. You are dangerous, she told him, maybe even worse than Eric, but your darkness actually serves a higher purpose. That makes you different. They finished their meal in a quiet harmony. When Adrian walked her to her door, the gesture carried a strange, protective warmth. Try to rest, he whispered, knowing tomorrow would demand every ounce of her strength. But as he turned to leave the shadows of the hallway, Lena reached out and caught his arm. Thank you for believing I was worth the trouble, she whispered. Listen closely, because we all know what it feels like to be a burden. But Adrian's expression softened into something beautifully unexpected. You were never trouble, Lena, he murmured. You were just someone who needed help. That night, sleep was a brutal battlefield. She was haunted by nightmares of Eric's hands crushing her throat, only soothed by the echo of Adrian promising her safety. When morning broke, she felt utterly hollowed out. Rosa brought her warm coffee, offering a quiet, maternal comfort. Lena washed away the cold sweat, dressing in simple clothes, nothing Eric could easily grab. She left her fading facial bruises bare, a silent, defiant testament to the agony she had survived. Downstairs, Dante and Adrian stood waiting. radiating a calm, lethal readiness. Adrian laid out the absolute laws of survival. Stay in the light. Do not let him pull you into the shadows. If his temper flares, walk away. Dante and I will be watching. He looked at her with intense clarity. You owe him nothing, Lena. No closures, no soft apologies. If he asks why you ran, tell him it is because he broke you. The cafe was a bright sanctuary, buzzing with people living ordinary lives. Dante Day swept the room like a hawk, securing their vantage point. And then there was Eric. He sat in a corner booth, his face a swollen canvas of the brutal violence he had finally received in return. His jaw was bruised, his wrist in heavy plaster. The tyrant who had once ruled her entire world now looked incredibly small, diminished by his own tragic choices. He stood up when he saw her approach, his good hand trembling in a desperate fist. Lena forced her trembling legs forward. She slid into the seat, locking her eyes onto his without a single flinch. You look good, Eric muttered, his voice a broken rasp. She stared right back. I am safe now, she replied coldly. Safe? He spat the word out like poison. Is that what you call hiding behind a criminal? I call it surviving, she countered. You and I have seen this exact manipulation before, haven't we? Eric leaned in, swearing he never meant to hurt her, begging that they could somehow fix their marriage. But Lena held her ground, her voice an unyielding blade. We could never fix things, Eric, because you are broken in a way that shatters everyone around you. I spent 2 agonizing years believing my love could eventually cure your dark demons. It was never going to be enough. So no, I am not giving up. I am finally choosing to live. Leaving you is the smartest decision I have made in years. Eric leaned closer, dropping his voice into that sickeningly intimate tone he used to reel her back in. Baby, please, listen. I know I messed up, but I will change. Do not throw away what we built. She stared with exhausted disbelief. What did we build, Eric? A marriage where I slept on the couch to survive. A life where I painted over bruises with makeup and lied about my limps. I am completely done. His mask of repentance instantly shattered, exposing the boiling rage underneath. He hissed that she was only leaving him for Castellano, trying to twist his own sins into her betrayal. This is strictly about you hitting me, she stated firmly. Everything else is just the bitter consequence of your violence. I want you to come home, he begged, a pathetic desperation bleeding into his heavy words. I really need you. Then you will just have to learn, she replied with chilling calm. The papers are filed. We are finished. In a sudden flash of toxic habit, Eric's hand shot across the table, digging viciously into her wrist. You belong to me, he growled. Across the room, Adrian began to rise chair like a waking predator. But Lena raised her free hand, commanding him to stay. This was her battle to win. Let go of me, she demanded. Eric sneered, asking if her new boyfriend would put her in the hospital next. You should be the terrified one, she whispered. The only reason you are still breathing is because I asked him not to kill you. She violently yanked her arm free. But that mercy only lasts if you stay away. The absolute second you ever come near me again, you are done. And that is not a hollow threat. That is just cold, hard reality. He stared back, entirely stunned. Something shifted in Eric's eyes. A sudden recognition that the victim he used to terrorize no longer sat across from him. Do you really hate me that much? He asked in a weak whisper. I do not hate you, she replied softly. I just do not love you anymore, and I do not fear you. Those were the only chains keeping me in your hell. She stood up, finally seeing him not as a monster, but as a deeply pathetic soul who weaponized his own inner pain. Sign the papers, Eric. Move on. Leave me alone. And if I do not, he challenged. Then you will die, she stated, with tragic simplicity. I will mourn the good man you could have been, but I will never mourn you. She turned her back on him forever, walking away as Adrian fell perfectly into step beside her, his warm hand resting protectively against her spine, guiding her toward the heavy glass doors. They were near the street when Eric's desperate voice echoed behind them. "This is not over." Adrian stopped dead in his tracks. He turned, and in that agonizing heartbeat, Lena finally witnessed what made this man so terrifying. It was not his violence. It was his absolute chilling certainty, the quiet, pitch-black promise in his eyes that he would gladly burn the city down to protect her. "Yes, it is over," Adrian called back, his deep baritone carrying a lethal weight. "And if you are too stupid to grasp that, I will make sure you understand it permanently. Choose your fate." Eric opened his mouth, but the fight simply drained that out of him. He slumped back, a completely defeated man. Safe inside the car, Lena's adrenaline finally crashed. She began violently shaking, feeling deeply sick to her stomach. "You did incredibly well," Adrian murmured softly. "You faced him and walked away. That took real, undeniable bravery." "Your body is just processing the stress," he said gently. "Just breathe." But the shivering only multiplied. Lena hugged her chest, walked, trying to hold her shattered pieces together, until something finally cracked wide open inside her soul. She began to weep, agonizing sobs tearing through 2 years of repressed terror. We all carry invisible weights, do we not? And when we finally drop them, the crash is always deafening. Adrian killed the engine and pulled her into his chest. She collapsed into his warmth without hesitation. His hands traced soothing circles on her back, his deep voice chanting a quiet mantra. "I have got you. You are safe now." For the first time in years, she actually believed it. They sat in that car for 20 minutes, letting her cry until she was utterly empty, leaving her softly embarrassed by the dark tear stains she left on his shirt, completely raw and beautifully vulnerable. "Sorry," she muttered, wiping away her tears. Adrian offered her a monogrammed handkerchief, a quiet kindness in the dark. "Don't be. You held it together when it mattered," he said softly. "I feel like I am losing my mind," she whispered. He started the car, his voice a steady anchor. "You are processing trauma. You need real rest, but rest is a ghost to a mind on fire. Have you ever tried to sleep when the past is screaming?" Lena's thoughts spun in an agonizing loop, replaying Eric's cold eyes. He looked at her, not as a living soul, but as a stolen possession. That is the tragedy of men like Eric. They stand in the ashes of the lives they burn down and cry about the smoke. Back at the quiet estate, Lena retreated to her room, entirely unable to find peace. She paced the floorboards, sat down, then stood right back up. The silence was suffocating. Giving up, she wandered downstairs, finding Adrian bathed in the low light of his office. He was on the phone, his face carved with heavy shadows. Hanging up, he sighed with deep resignation. "Eric filed a police report," he told her, his voice grim. "Claims you were forced into the meeting, that he fears for his life. It is official nonsense." Lena felt the floor drop. "What does that mean?" Adrian leaned back, the weight of the underworld pressing on his shoulders. "The police will investigate. They will question you. It is a nuisance, but we must step carefully." Lena looked at him, her heart shattering all over again. "He is not going to stop, is he?" Adrian stared back, his voice stone cold. "No, which means we must discuss our next steps." Lena sank into the leather chair, the heavy silence pressing on her chest. "What kind of next steps?" she asked. Adrian looked at her with sorrowful eyes. "The permanent kind, where Eric stops existing." The words hung in the dim room like smoke. "I know you asked me to spare him, But he is escalating. That only ends one way. She gripped the armrests tightly. You want my permission? He leaned forward. I want you prepared for the reality that he might not survive his own choices, and I need to know you will not hate me. Lena pictured Eric, still trying to cage her. She remembered the women who ran out of time before escaping the men they once loved. I will not hate you, she finally whispered, her voice heavy with grief. But please, try everything else first. Restraining orders, warnings, she pleaded, only if he tries to hurt me again. Adrian stared into the pitch black night. Fair enough, he murmured, but the divorce is stalling. His lawyer claims you were forced into filing. Lena felt cold dread wash over her. How long will it drag on? She asked. Months, Adrian replied, unless we offer him money to drop the claims and leave the state. Bitter anger twisted in her chest. You want to pay the man who battered me? Adrian's face was a mask of cold logic. I want to buy your freedom. $50,000 to make your monster vanish. Is your peace of mind worth that price? Oh, she shook her head, tears burning her eyes. It is not about the money. It is about the principle. He beat me for 2 years, and we reward him. Adrian stepped closer, his voice a low hum. We make him irrelevant. I know you want him to suffer. You and I both know how intoxicating revenge can feel, don't we? The desperate need for payback. But the goal is your freedom, Adrian urged. If $50,000 buys your life back faster than violence, it is worth it. His logic was flawless, even as it made her sick. She wanted her abuser to lose everything. She craved brutal justice. Yet, the quiet yearning for a life without fear spoke louder than her rage. She just wanted to close the dark book on Eric Hale forever. Okay, she whispered into the shadows. Make the offer. Eric's lawyer jumped at the cash without a second thought. $50,000. That was the price tag on her freedom, and Eric signed the papers instantly to vanish within 30 days. It should have felt like a triumph, but a cold, hollow emptiness settled inside Lena. 2 years of her life, traded for the cost of a cheap car. The humiliation of being discarded cut deeper than the physical bruises ever did. As shadows grew long in the garden, Adrian found her resting on the stone bench. He sat quietly beside her, sensing her quiet despair. Lena sighed, her voice breaking. She was glad it was over, but it shattered her completely. She spent 2 painful years hoping for love beneath his rage, only to be sold off without a single fight. It is a harsh truth we all face eventually. Sometimes the people we ache to fix never truly valued us at all. What does that say about my worth? She asked into the night. Adrian did not hesitate. It says he never deserved you, he replied, his voice a steady anchor. He made it clear the $50,000 was never a price tag on her soul, but simply the toll to make a monster vanish. When she doubted him, his gaze locked onto hers. He told her she was worth the heavy risks and the endless complications. Eric was too broken to see anything beyond his own selfish need for control. And that was his failure, not hers. Those words shifted something deep within her chest. Someone finally saw a human being instead of a burden or a broken toy. Thank you for seeing that, she whispered. And here is a thought for you listening tonight. Your true worth is never defined by the ones who are too blind to see it. She thanked him for treating her like a person. Adrian's expression softened in the dim light. You were never a project, he told her. You just needed help. And stepping in has been the most worthwhile thing I have done in a long time. The air between them thickened, and a carefully drawn boundary was suddenly erased. Lena felt the shift in his heavy gaze, making the space between them feel dangerously small. They were no longer just the protector and the survivor. She whispered his name, but he quickly stood up, retreating behind his walls. He told her to rest. The divorce would be final in a week, and then she had to figure out her next move, whether she stayed in the city or started fresh elsewhere. Her life was finally hers to command. We often fear the blank page, but an empty canvas is truly the greatest gift we can ever receive. You have options now, he told her. That is the whole point. After he walked away, Lena sat alone in the garden until the lights flickered to life, floating in that strange void between her painful past and the unknown horizon. For 2 years, she had mastered survival. She knew how to shrink herself and anticipate a strike. Now, she faced something far more terrifying, learning how to actually live again. The week drifted by in a surreal haze. Eric took his buyout on Tuesday and vanished out of state. By Thursday, a judge stamped the papers. The chains were broken and Lena was officially free. But as she waited for a rush of relief, nothing came. Just a cold, heavy numbness. When you spend your entire life running from the fire, the absolute hardest part is figuring out how to stand completely still once the flames finally die out. Adrian gave her the quiet space she needed, but he started traveling more, taking unnecessary meetings to create distance between them. Whether he did it to protect her peace or guard his own heavy heart, Lena could not say. Seeking a tether to the real world, she started dropping by the old cafe, not to work, but sitting there grounded her. Maria would hug her tight, asking 0 questions, just letting Lena breathe in the comforting hum of normalcy. One afternoon, Maria slid into the booth and noted that Lena looked different, less terrified of the shadows. When asked about her grand plan, Lena just stared into her mug. She had safety money now, but survival modes does a terrible thing to the spirit. She confessed that after so long just trying not to drown, she had completely forgotten how to dream. Recovery is a slow road, demanding we learn to walk all over again. Then you start small, Maria advised softly. Find out what brings you joy, what makes you feel like a living soul instead of a broken toy. She squeezed Lena's hand, reminding her that choice is the true definition of freedom. Later, Lena returned to the estate, finding Adrian locked in his office. A flicker of surprise crossed his tired eyes when she knocked. He immediately dropped his pen, giving her his full focus. Settling into the chair, Lena took a deep breath. She wanted to stay in the city, to plant her feet and build something new instead of running from her ghosts. But then came the hardest part. She looked him in the eye and said she could not stay in his house forever. She needed her own place to truly stand on her own 2 feet. True healing always requires us to eventually step out of the safe harbor and brave the open water alone. You can stay as long as you need to, he offered, his voice thick with worry. But that was exactly the problem. If she stayed in his golden cage, she would never learn to fly. She told him this protective bubble would keep her from moving forward. She needed to prove she was more than just a fragile bird. You have already proven your strength, he argued. But she had to believe it herself, which was impossible, while hiding behind his walls. A heavy silence filled the room. Adrian carefully asked if she felt burdened by the money, swearing it was never alone. It was not about debts, though. Lena needed an identity beyond the tragic victim he had rescued. She had to discover who she was when no one was saving her, and no one was hunting her. To find out who we really are, we must often bravely strip away the very things keeping us perfectly safe. Okay, he said, burying a brief flash of disappointment under a calm mask. He asked if the end of the month worked. Lena nodded, saying it gave her time to find an apartment, unless he needed her out sooner. No, he replied, staring out the dark window. He told her she was making the right choice, deserving a life built with her own hands. But when he turned back, his eyes locked fiercely onto hers. Moving out does not mean you are alone, he promised. If she ever felt unsafe, he would still be right there. His unwavering vow made her throat tight. In her rush for independence, she had ignored the weight of leaving. She had grown so used to his steady presence, his shield, and the warm gravity of his orbit. The realization hit her hard. She was going to miss him terribly. We often push away our safest harbors just to prove we can survive the storm. "Thank you for everything," she whispered, "for noticing me when I was invisible, for helping when you owed me nothing, and believing I was worth saving." Adrian's gaze softened. "You were always worth saving," he replied. "I just happened to be in a position to help." He moved behind his heavy desk, shuffling papers, and offered to introduce her to landlords. It was a polite but clear dismissal. Standing up, Lena felt the crushing weight of her choices. She had drawn a boundary and claimed her freedom. So why did her chest ache, like she had made a terrible mistake? 2 weeks later, she signed a lease on a quiet one-bedroom apartment with heavy locks, close enough to walk to the cafe. It was a fresh start. True independence is a beautiful victory, but you and I know the painful truth. Those very first steps, taken entirely alone, are always the absolute coldest. Maria helped her move, filling the rooms with bright chatter, while Lena stared at the terrifying canvas of her new life. Dante soon arrived with boxes of supplies. There was no card from Adrian, just Dante assuring her that Mr. Castellano wanted her cared for. When night fell, Lena found herself completely alone. The apartment echoed with absolute freedom and crushing isolation. Eating takeout on an old couch, she wondered if she had made a mistake. That first week was brutal. She woke up in a bed that was hers alone. No guards. No Adrian sitting in the dark to keep the monsters away. Just the heavy, terrifying quiet of independence. She was finally learning how to be Lena Torres again, putting her soul back together piece by broken piece. Or perhaps she was meeting herself for the very first time. She returned to her shifts at the restaurant, smiling at strangers who had no idea she had just lived in a kingpin's mansion. There is a strange comfort in performing normality, hiding deep trauma behind a simple apron. Maria watched her closely, always asking if she was okay. "I think so," Lena replied. "I am finally learning who I am without a man dictating my worth." Still, the shadows crept in at night. She suffered nightmares where Eric cornered her and Adrian was not there to save her. "The bad dreams still come," Lena confessed softly over coffee. "But when I wake up, my door is locked. I am safe, and my ex-husband is just a faded ghost, banished to Arizona, never to hurt me again. If he breaks the contract, Adrian gets to handle him." Eric is motivated to stay away. 3 agonizing weeks bled by without a glimpse of Adrian. Dante brought updates, mentioning the boss was swamped with underworld business. He let slip that Adrian always asked about her, careful not to sound desperate. Lena tried to lie to herself. She claimed this silence was necessary for her independence. She told herself the hollow ache in her chest was just her mind adjusting, but she missed him fiercely. She missed the low timbre of his voice in the dark. She missed the way his eyes made her feel entirely visible. She missed a profound safety that had nothing to do with deadbolts. Secretly mourning a romance she had been too deeply broken to accept when he was standing right beside her. It was Rosa who finally shattered the heavy quiet. Picture this. Late afternoon, the apartment thick with unspoken things. When Rosa walked in carrying a warm casserole and a gaze that saw right through the walls. "You are being stubborn," Rosa told her, setting the jean the dish down, both of you. Lena played dumb, but Rosa had worked for Adrian for 8 years. She knew the shape of a man missing someone, and she saw the same hollow look in Lena. You are trying to prove you do not need him, Rosa said. Lena sighed, whispering that it was complicated. The plated. Rosa simply unpacked the plates. You think you need to be flawless before you earn a little joy, she said. You think you have to be totally healed, but that is not how life works. I was married to a cruel man for 2 years, Lena replied. I barely know who I am without that pain, Lena confessed. How do I start over when I am still sorting through the wreckage? By being honest, Rosa answered. By admitting independence does not mean loneliness. Rosa met her eyes. Adrian stepped in because you were drowning, yes, but he cares for you because of who you are, not the tragedy you survived. You are allowed to care back. What if I am not ready? Lena asked. Then you are not ready, Rosa said softly, but do not use that as an excuse to push away a good thing. You deserve happiness, even with your scars. After Rosa left, those words haunted the quiet rooms. Lena thought about Adrian. He had kept his distance, letting her walk away to prove she could stand on her own. Her desperate need to be strong was blinding her. You and I both know how heavy a phone feels when your heart is on the line. She picked it up 3 times before dialing. He answered on the second ring. Lena, is everything okay? Yeah. She paused, suddenly terrified. Do you want to have dinner at my place? I thought we could talk. The silence stretched so long, she almost took it back. Then he spoke. Oh, I would like that. Tomorrow at 7? I will be there. Lena spent the next day scrubbing a spotless apartment, desperate to quiet her mind. She just needed to see them together, without a crisis hanging over their heads. Adrian knocked exactly at 7. He stood there holding wine, looking strangely uncertain, like a man stepping onto thin ice. Come in, she whispered. His broad shoulders filled the tiny room. She had made a simple pasta. They sat at her small table, trading stories about work and the weather, desperate for a normal evening. It was not until the wine bottle sat mostly empty that Lena broke the quiet. Sitting on her faded couch, she looked at him. I have been stupid. Adrian shifted, a dark eyebrow arching. How so? He asked, his voice a low rumble. I spent the last month fighting a ghost, she admitted. I tried so hard to prove my independence that I forgot to ask what brings me joy. She held his steady gaze. The truth is, I miss you. I miss feeling like someone sees the real me, not the victim, not the tragedy, just me. Adrian let out a heavy breath. Lena, let me finish, he interrupted. I know you are healing. You probably think I am confusing gratitude with love, or that this is a trauma bond. I think this is me finally healthy enough to know when something feels right. Adrian was dead quiet, like the calm before a storm. What are you saying? He asked. I am saying I want to try, she breathed. I want to see where this goes. Not because you saved me, but because I like who I am when you are near. I am ready to stop running from good things out of fear. Adrian shook his head, a bitter shadow crossing his face. I am not a safe choice, Lena. I am a criminal. I solve problems with violence. My life is a hazard. It is my decision to make, she countered, reaching to grip his hand. And I am making it. Tell me you do not want this. And we go back to nothing. His grip tightened around her fingers, an anchor in the dark. I want this, he confessed. I have wanted it for so long. I did not think you would see me as anything other than the man who helped you escape. I see you as the man who noticed me when no one else bothered, she whispered. The man who treated me like I mattered, who protected me without putting a leash on my neck. You looked at a broken thing and saw someone worth saving. His voice was a low rumble. You were never broken, just bent by cruel circumstance. Then help me straighten out, she pleaded, not as a savior, but as a man who cares. Adrian pulled her in, resting his forehead against hers. I can do that, he murmured. The kiss was not a fiery explosion. It was soft, tentative. Two battered souls finding light in the dark. A piece of Lena finally clicked into place. This was simply two scarred people choosing each other. They took it slow. Let us be honest for a second. Healing is never a straight line. Lena kept her independence. She kept her job, but slowly, she allowed herself to lean on him when the world got heavy. She learned that a hand did not mean losing her. And Adrian, the hardened man, learned to unlock the steel vault of his chest. He shared the bruised parts of his past, letting himself be truly vulnerable. It was not a fairy tale. They clashed over her stubborn pride and his instinct to solve every problem with force. They had to navigate the agonizing reality of loving a man whose life swam in criminal waters. But despite a foundation built on the desperate gasps of two survivors crawling out of hell, it somehow worked. 6 months later, Lena enrolled in night classes for social work. She wanted to be a lighthouse for other battered women. She wanted to be what Adrian had been for her. The person who noticed the invisible bruises. Adrian quietly paid her tuition. You can stand on your own 2 feet and still let the people who love you carry the weight, he told her. A year after escaping Eric, Lena moved into Adrian's home. Not out of desperation, but because she simply wanted to. Waking up beside him felt like breathing pure air. Months later, standing at the altar as Maria's maid of honor, Lena marveled at her own journey. From trembling on cold bathroom floors to this beautiful, sunlit existence. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, a shadow of Eric would cross her mind. She found herself hoping he had finally conquered his own twisted demons out in that desert. Most days, Eric was just a ghost fading in the rearview mirror, a closed chapter. The real work belonged to the present, the beautiful struggle of learning how to trust again, accepting that she deserved the sun, even while piecing her soul together. Because here is a simple truth. You do not have to be completely unbroken to be worthy of love. Then came a rainy Tuesday. No cinematic speeches. Just the two of them eating dinner when Adrian looked up and simply said, "Marry me." Lena stared at this dangerous man who loved her in the quietest, most unshakable way. Yes, she breathed, but we take it slow. Separate accounts, a prenup, a shield for us both. Adrian laughed, a deep, rich sound. Whatever you need, he promised. What I need, she smiled, is to know we step into this as equals. He pulled her into his arms. You saved yourself, he murmured. I just provided the door. Lena smiled warmly. We saved each other. You gave me safety, I gave you purpose. Their small wedding was a quiet victory over the darkness. Rosa wept with joy, and Dante toasted to a love that thawed his boss's cold heart. Standing at the altar, holding the man who saw her when the world looked away, Lena finally felt it, hope. Have you ever felt that kind of hope? Not the panic of a drowning soul, but the steady warmth of a survivor rising from the ash. Weeks later, watching the stars through a cabin skylight, she thought of the battered woman she used to be on that cold bathroom floor. She had once believed that endless agony was her only destiny. How beautiful it is to finally be free. Lena realized how deeply she had once misunderstood her own worth. But her tragic past had forged a woman she finally recognized. What are you thinking about? Adrian murmured, pulling her close. How far I have come, she breathed. Any regrets? None. Every bruised memory, every horrific night led me here. To you, I would not trade a second, even the dark hours, he asked. Especially those, she whispered. We often find that hitting rock bottom teaches the profound difference between surviving and truly living. It shows that reaching out is a defiant battle cry, and it takes terrifying courage to simply let someone care. Adrian pressed a protective kiss to her pale forehead. "You will save so many lost souls," he promised. "You understand exactly the heavy toll it takes to finally break your chains. I want to be the one who refuses to look away when the world turns blind," she said. You already are," he whispered. They rested in the dark, the distant wind singing a song of peace. Lena's mind drifted to the forgotten women weeping on cold floors, convinced the universe had abandoned them. She could not save every battered soul, but she could be the open door Adrian had been for her. The greatest lesson of surviving tragedy is the profound responsibility it leaves behind. We must build meaning from the wreckage, using our deepest scars to turn our midnight into someone else's dawn. True healing is always found in guiding others out of the fire. 3 years after escaping Eric's twisted grip, Lena opened a humble sanctuary, a vital lifeline to catch broken survivors before they hit the cold ground. It was a quiet storefront where shattered voices were finally heard. Adrian funded it, pulling strings to build a network of lawyers and safe houses. The first arrival was a trembling girl. Her skin painted in bruises convinced her life was over. Lena poured coffee and listened, offering 0 empty cliches. When the weeping girl asked if true escape was a fantasy, Lena held her terrified gaze. "There is a way out. It is agonizing, but you will not walk the fire alone. Here is a truth to remember. Sometimes, the most terrifying leaps are our only way to solid ground." Lena recalled her own desperate gamble, stepping into Adrian's waiting car against every instinct. Through him, she learned the profound difference between a monster's suffocating control and a true guardian's fierce protection. She had clawed out of hell and built a life pulsing with real love. Now, she was the lighthouse for others in the dark. It was not bitter revenge. Her abuser was likely still out there, playing the victim, but this was infinitely better than vengeance. She took the agony he inflicted and forged a shield for the vulnerable. The ultimate victory over evil is ensuring the cycle of suffering stops with you. Lying beside Adrian, Lena reflected on the beautiful reality she built from the ashes of her ruin. She refused to let a monster write her final chapter. "I love you," she whispered into the midnight air. "I love you too," he murmured. "Thank you for noticing me," she breathed softly. "Thank you for seeing a broken soul entirely worth saving, long after I had completely forgotten how to look." They slept tangled in the quiet dark, safe inside a home pulled from the ashes of their ruins. But this city never sleeps. Somewhere out there, staring into a bathroom mirror, another woman is tracing fringe robes. She is doing the terrible math of survival, weighing the danger of staying against the terror. Tomorrow, she might find the courage to step into Lena Torres's office and ask if the nightmare ever ends. Lena will be there, ready to hand down the very lifeline she was once given. Because here is the simple truth we all have to learn. Surviving the worst of your life is only the first step. The real victory is what you build after the rain stops. The old fear is gone. Lena is no longer outrunning her ghosts. For the first time, she is truly living.